Hi folks, and welcome back to Men of the Infinite. This is a video response, as you can probably tell by the title, to DanMill23's own video, 3 Intelligent Questions Every Atheist Should Answer. Thank you firstly to Dan for posing them. I'm not sure it's possible to do such questions justice in the 10 minutes available, but here goes anyway. His first question, if I'm characterizing it reasonably, is this: given the developmental and ever-changing nature of our empirical models of the way the world works, how much confidence do I have in contemporary evolutionary and cosmological models? I'm also assuming the question carries the implication of what those models and my confidence in them mean with respect to my atheism. Before I get to the meat of my response, I just want to say in passing that I think atheists and sundry secularists ought to be a little careful in how they use the point about belief in a flat earth. It can sometimes have something of a straw man quality to it. Certainly there have been cultural pockets in human history where people held this view. However, it's not true that humanity in any general sense ever did. Certainly the Christian world never did. The scholarship of the Christian world was essentially the scholarship of the Greeks, and they knew full well that the earth was roughly spherical. So, whilst I think some care with respect to the way this point is made should always be forthcoming, I mention it only in passing, as Dan's use in this context is fair enough. So, to the question itself, how much confidence do I have in contemporary evolutionary and cosmological models? My answer is I don't really have any at all, and that's because I don't really need any. These theories could be entirely overturned tomorrow, and it wouldn't make one iota of difference to my life or my philosophical positions. From a scientific standpoint, I don't have a lot of confidence in Big Bang cosmology, but it would take an entire video to outline why. Suffice it to say for this purpose that cosmology is of academic importance only, and the same with evolution, really. Evolution in its most basic sense is a philosophical and observational fact of life and reality. Specific theories about the mechanics of biological evolution will come and go, but its fundamental truth will remain. Now, Darwinian natural selection seems almost platitudinously correct to me, but hell, even that might one day be overturned. The most important point here is that such models don't inform my atheism in the slightest. They are actually 100% irrelevant to it, and I think ought to be irrelevant to anybody's. Atheism doesn't require them. Atheism at bottom doesn't need to assert anything about the world particularly. It merely has to say that no evidence exists for the various purported deities. It need do no more than that. I mean, there have been plenty of atheists in history who knew nothing of any of these scientific theories, yet their atheism was perfectly sound. Evolutionary theory is not and ought never be a pillar upon which one's atheism stands. If it is, then I'd suggest you've got your epistemological assumptions rather screwed up. It's also worth noting quickly that much as the overturning of specific models of its mechanisms don't disturb the brute fact of evolution, nor is the essential concept of God overturned by various refutations of specific notions about God. For example, just because one can refute omnibenevolence, that doesn't mean that one has refuted God thereby. It just means that a given idea about God has been proven false. Of course, the qualification with that would be that if one asserts that omnibenevolence is a necessary attribute of God, then yes, God in that case would be refuted. So in essence, I don't ultimately give a rat's about theories of evolution or cosmology, whatever intellectual curiosity I might sometimes direct at them. They don't inform anything of importance in my life. In other words, the point that I'm really trying to make here is that God is a philosophical problem, not an empirical one. Dan's second question had to do with science and religion both being consensus-based. And if we're prepared to accept this in science, why don't we accept it in religion or theology? The first thing I want to say is that we really have to cease using the word true when speaking of science. Science does not deal in truth. There is no truth in science and can never be. Science is simply about models that work and have utility and predictive value. Genuine truths are not contingent. That said, aside from the fact of accepting a thing true merely because of consensus being a blatant logical fallacy, the consensus of theism and science are really quite different in character. I'd suggest that comparing them is a little bit of an apples and oranges thing. Theistic consensus, such that it really exists at all, and it does really only exist on a fairly basic level, is entirely unsurprising and therefore not really a very powerful point. Humans naturally experience such a consensus because we share a common consciousness and psychology, one that experiences the same concerns and fears, the same forms of ignorance, one that asks essentially the same logical and theological questions. It's natural from this that answers of a similar nature will accrue. But it's vital to remember that such consensus does not constitute evidence of anything at all, other than itself. I cannot, even in theory, test the belief consensus of a bunch of Mormons. I can, however, in theory, test the empirical model or fact consensus of a bunch of quantum physicists. That's what really sets the two forms of consensus apart. Dan's third question was really about 3 or 4 in one. And again, I'm going to characterize those questions to suit myself. Do I have a better access to reality than a theist? Yes, I would claim to have exactly that, because the level of value I place on reason and rationality dictates the quality of logic I use, and also the quality of evidential criteria I'm willing to accept. The more rational one is, the closer one is to truth and reality. That for me is a more or less definitional fact. Do I think the world would be a better place if people were more rational? Absolutely yes. I'd defy anyone to sensibly dispute that. Now, as to whether I want people to believe what I do or think the way I do, I don't want people believing anything, particularly. Rational people don't necessarily believe things. What they do is strive for philosophical understanding, combined with the best utilization of workable empirical models available. That's all they really do. There's really nothing to believe as such. As to whether I want people to think like me, well, yes, of course I do. I would suggest that anyone who says differently is either insane or lying to themselves about it. If I hold that I'm a rational person and I believe rationality makes for a better world, it follows by simple logical consequence that I really do want people to think like I do. That is to say, I want people to be rational. For those who possibly don't believe that they're also like that, I'd offer this little mind experiment. Imagine that one by one, every human being starts to think in a completely different way to you about everything. Eventually, everyone is like this and you're utterly alone. Stop and consider how this would cause you to feel, then place that feeling within the question of whether you want people to think like you do. Taking a cue from Nietzsche, it's a natural expression of will to power, to want to take one's nature into the world and have the world conform to, or at least reflect, that nature. Again, anyone who thinks they're not like this is, in my opinion, kidding themselves. Even where we want people to oppose us and to grant us an opportunity to express our nature and thereby validate our being, we still nevertheless want the world to exist in a way that reflects who and what we are. Imagine, if you will, a world that was 100% indifferent to you. Now tell me you don't want the world to be what you want it to be. Okay, well, time is about defeating us, so I'll wrap it up there. Thanks again to Dan for those questions. I do hope you keep asking them. Bye for now from Men of the Infinite.